Okay, well, let's have a look at mixing drums. Let's listen to a small section of the song in context, and then we are going to solo the drums and see what I've done on the individual tracks.
Marquis, tu es plus heureux que moi d'avoir femme si belle. Si tu voulais me la donner, je me charge.
Okay, now let's solo the drums and see how they sound isolated. First really important thing to consider is phase relationship between individual tracks. So you're recording an instrument, one big instrument with lots of different microphones, and if they don't add up perfectly, then you will really mess up your sound. I will give you a quick example so you know immediately what I'm talking about. Well, I can solo the whole drum kit and just flip polarity of the snare microphone, for example, and you will see what happens if it's flipped in the wrong direction. So now it's how it's supposed to be. And now I will flip polarity here. Listen to the snare. Flip back. So basically you're losing your whole bottom end if polarity is inversed, so which means that one microphone tries to let the speaker move towards you, the other microphone lets the speaker move away from you, and they cancel out each other, and this is the result. You get thin sounding drums. Another thing that I like to do is have a look at time adjusting the microphones one to each other. If you take a snare drum, for example, it will arrive first at the snare microphone. It will arrive much later at the overhead microphones, even late at the room microphones, even late at the far room mics, and something in between on all the other microphones, because hi-hat microphone is going to pick up snare, tom microphones, etc. So they all arrive at different times, and if you add that up, it's going to be messy. So it can sound nice, but you can tighten it up by, for example, moving all closed microphones, adjusting them all to the overheads. This is what I did here, as well as flipping polarity in the right place on all the drums. Let's have a listen to the drums when everything is coherent, and then I will bypass all time adjustment and all phase at once, and you will hear what happens to the drums then. Now I mute it. Put back in. So here you lose everything. You lose bottom end, you lose definition. It's really important to keep that in mind and keep switching back and forth while mixing, because one other thing that happens is if you put a low cut, for example, on one of the microphones, it can change phase relationship. So if you have everything checked and then you go and make a steep high cut on a single drum microphone, it can happen that then you will have cancellation. So as soon as you change an EQ drastically, you better go back and check if phase relationship is good or if you need to switch it then. Okay, let's have a look at individual tracks and what treatment I chose to make on them. Let's start with kick drum. So this is just the plain old Battre 52 inside the bass drum. You can hear it doesn't have a huge bottom end. I put it close to the Battre. I just wanted to snap. That was what I was aiming for with this microphone. So I boosted a little bit top end to get a little bit more smack, and carved out a little bit of mud down here, because you tend to get a build up if you don't carve out, like, let's say 150 to 300-400 ish. It will get very muddy. So this is the microphone inside. Just a little correction here. The limiter, it doesn't do anything. It's just I use it to raise the volume because I don't want to go above 0 with my faders. That's just a nerdy thing that I don't like. Let's have a look at the outside microphone. We had the big AEA R44 ribbon microphone. I like it because it has a strong bottom end and it blends nicely with the inside microphone. So let's have a listen to it the way I have it in the mix. And what I did is I cut everything above. Let me bypass the EQ. I put it back in. So basically, many people like to use a sub kick, which is basically an NS10 woofer that you put in front of the bass drum to capture low end. I had one, I didn't like it. I prefer this much better. So this, in addition to the inside microphone, gives a nice thick bass drum. Without the outside, with, just adds that little extra weight that we like. There is not much more on the bass drum. Let's have a look at snare microphone. I used 2 snare microphones. One was a dynamic, the other one was a condenser microphone. Let's have a look what they sound like. Well, actually, I see that in this groovy part, I didn't use the dynamic microphone. I chose to just use one. So let's have a listen. So I added a little bit of reverb. I make it dry for a second. Okay, now one big thing with snare microphone is you always have to fight hi-hat bleed. That's really a pain in the butt, but you have to deal with it. Fortunately, there is a company that offers a really nice plugin that helps with that. Let's have a listen at this plugin and see what it does for us. It's called Debleeder by Wilkinson. Put it in. Of course, on the hit you get a little bit of hi-hat, but it's so much cleaner and you can boost a little bit of high end without getting hi-hat all over the place. Next thing we have is a little bit of EQ. Boost a little high end. Again, carved out a little bit in the middle so that it doesn't get too boxy. And here I think it was just a resonant that I didn't like overall. I solo it. Let me bypass. Back in. So this steep notch is just getting rid of this little ringing, and it's just a little cleanup, but nothing dramatic. Next is a little compression, also not a lot. What I wanted to do with compression is get a little bit more body and a little bit more sustain. So I shaved off the initial attack a little bit, which lets the sustain seem a little bit longer or fuller. Without. With. More sustain, because you change the relationship between attack and sustain. So if I reduce the attack a little bit, obviously you will have more sustain as a result. This is all that I wanted. I want a little bit more compact sound. And that's more or less what we have. I see that I planned on using some, let's call it, yeah, well, it is distortion, but let's call it more saturation on the snare. I didn't end up using it, but I will show you what you can do with it if you like to. The meter is not going to change, so your peak stays the same, but the snare is going, or any signal basically, is going to be much louder. The volume will be perceived as much louder, although you are not going to have higher peaks. Have a look at that. It's a little bit exaggerated, but you get the point. So without. With. Now have a look at the meter. It's not moving, but it's so much louder. Peak is here. Peak is still here. Okay, this is too crushed, but in some dirty metal part that might be really, really great. You have a dirty, thick in your face snare. Not in that part, but yeah, now you know about this little trick. Let's have a look at, well, here I have a little sample that I added. I can show you what it does. Just a little bit of depth. I used a sample that blends nicely. It's really subtle, but in the mix it just gives a little bit of depth without using too much reverb, because reverb makes it a little bit washy. And here I have a sample that is a little bit roomy, so we add this in and get just a little bit of depth. That's basically all the replacement or augmented. By we replaced nothing, it's just augmented the snare a little bit to give it a little bit more depth. Okay, next is snare bottom. Nothing spectacular happening, just a little brightness. I did nothing, no EQ, no compression, nothing. Just phase alignment and time alignment, that's it. Let's have a look at toms. What I always do is I don't use gates, but I cut them free, so we don't have all the rumble that the microphones are going to pick up eventually, because I just want them to be audible when toms are played. So this is solo. Okay, and then silence in between. Otherwise you have hi-hat and crashes and all the stuff that you don't want. In some genres you might want a little bit of bleed, but here I wanted to keep it clean and in your face. Let's have a look at hi-hat. They were nice on overheads, but I always place a microphone anyway, so just in case you need to take a little bit more focus on it. Let's have a listen. What I did is I put a compressor on that will be triggered by the snare only. I used a sidechain filter that will listen to the fundamental of the snare. So the snare is going to duck the signal a little bit, so I don't have excessive snare on the hi-hat microphone giving me a weird stereo image if the snare is coming from the side where I pan the hi-hat. It's very subtle, but I show you with and without. So you see it's ducking 6 dB when the snare is hitting. Without. With. It's subtle, but it pulls back the snare a little bit and giving us a cleaner and more transparent snare sound overall. Then a little high end. This EQ is really nice with this air band. It's a very gentle high end boost with a very gentle slope. So I just brighten it up a little bit. Without. With. Just a little sparkle. Okay, next overhead. I usually, when I record drums, the first microphones I place are the overheads. So those give you the general image of the drums. So how do the cymbals sound? How does the kit sound overall? So this is very important to get right. Okay, I had a little bit more focus on the crashes. Sometimes you can record it in a way that you have even more snare or more bass drum or more toms and everything, but I wanted to focus a little bit more on the main crashes. That's why they are a little bit more up front. But you also have snare and everything else. It's difficult to get bass drum and snare exactly center, since the drummer never has the snare really in the center, but you have to place around so that you don't have really funky bass drum right, snare left. But I think we got it pretty nice. The snare is a little bit off center and the bass drum is a little bit off center, but as soon as you add the individual microphones, everything is going to sit nicely where you want to hear it. Let's have a look at what we did. This plugin is really, really great. It's a game changer. I don't like that word, but it's like magic. It's like a multi-band compression thing with a bazillion different bands. I wanted to de-harsh a little bit every time when a cymbal hits, to just make it a little bit softer, a little bit gentler, a little bit more controlled. Let me show you what it does. Without. A little bit harsh in these high mids, but I wanted to have it a little bit more gentle, and that's exactly what this thing does. Reacting, it's like a dynamic EQ thing with lots of different bands. Really, really brilliant. Next thing I did is split EQ is like a transient designer thing, but you can really go on a on a certain frequency. So you change the balance between transient and tonal information, which means impact and sustain. So basically you can go there and say, I change the sustain or the attack of one specific frequency region. Here we had a little ring in the snare, and I don't wanted it to ring that long, but I didn't want to kill that frequency completely. So if I would have used an EQ, that frequency would have been gone. So now I only remove it from the sustain. Let's have a listen what it does. I solo it for a second. So we just remove some sustain of this little ringy thing, which cleans up the snare basically. Next we have is a little carving. I put 2 notches here because when the drummer was playing the ride, it was a little bit harsh in this region, so you can't hear it on this hi-hat part, but as soon as the ride is playing, it just softens a little bit. Here, as I mentioned before, a little carving out in the low mids just to make space, because if you add layer and layer and layer, you will eventually get a build-up in those low mids, and it will just sound muddy. So you have to carve out a little bit. And here I softened the overheads even a little more to get them a little bit less shiny and bright. Let's have a listen. And of course, I cut out a little bit low end because you will eventually also get build up there. If overheads, rooms and bass drum and everything has all the rumble, then it will be really messy down there. Because the success to getting a fat mix is not having much going on down there. So you leave space for the bass drum and the bass, and everything else, get rid of it down there. So you have space for the really nice low end. Let me bypass the EQ and show what it does. Without. So it's not really killing the snare or anything, it's just cleaning up a little bit, making it a little bit brighter and a little bit less oomph. Next is a tiny little bit of compression I put because I liked what this compressor, this is a complete channel strip, but I basically just used the compressor. It just making the snare sound a little bit more compact on the overheads. Let me bypass it and show you what it does. Just 6 dB, not major. I put it off. And with. Just a little bit more compact, and it will help the snare sound more compact overall instead of it's just going to be more. Let's have a look at the rooms. It's going to be a very similar treatment as to the overheads. Again, soothe to get rid of a little harshness, because if you want to use compression and stuff on the room microphones and you leave all the high end, then it's going to be splashy and very bright. I want the room to be like a power ball and not like splashy thing. So this is controlling this harshness in the room. Next, an EQ. This was again, I think it was for when the drummer was playing the ride. It had very sharp, ringy. I didn't want that. I wanted to get rid of it and make it sound more gentle. Again, as on the other tracks, carving out a little low mud. Otherwise, it will just build up and be a complete mess. And this one was a resonance from the snare that was a little bit more than we wanted. So let me bypass it and show what it does. Listen to it on the snare. Now it's gone. Just cleaner, without the mud, without the ring, without the harshness when the ride is going to play later. A little EQ, I removed even more high mids. This is around, where is it, 4.5K. Just make it a little bit more gentle. And then some compression. I just use the plain old stock avid compressor. I really like it. Let's listen to what it does. It really makes a compact room. Without. Listen to the snare. And with. It's not a lot, it's like not even 6 dB of gain reduction, but it's just a little bit here, a little bit there. It's like cooking with spice, so a little bit here, a little bit there, and overall it really helps getting this powerful ball of a drum instead of all over the place. And then, because one soothe is not enough, we put another one to get more control over the low end and to basically get control over it. I remove it, and with. It's basically just cleaning up so that not every hit again gives a build up in those low mids and keep everything clean. Then comes the really nice room. If you remember, we showed you that we placed the far room microphones outside the recording room. We left the door open and put my wooden ball with 2 omnis just right next to them, and it behaves a little bit like your head, 2 ears and a separating ball in between. It's a really nice room sound, and we place it outside the recording room in the untreated lounge to get a really big sound. Listen to what it does. Sounds so much bigger than what I can achieve within the live room. Again, a little bit of soothe for the same reason as before. Sounds familiar, a little carving out, a little bit removing of resonance. Then compression to get rid of the initial attacks and give more space to the room. So you change the ratio of attack and sustain, and we want sustain because that gives the impression of depth and being far away. Then another thing that you certainly know is transient designer even changing more the relationship of attack and sustain. So we removed all the attack and boosted sustain. This is dramatic what it does. Listen with and without. Without. Listen to the attack of the bass drum. With. So it's. You basically move it 20 meters further away, and this is what we want because we want a sensation of depth. Then the limiter doesn't, well, it does nothing. It's there, just in case. I copied the room track for the part where the ride was played because we had more resonance, so I carved out a little bit there, but all the rest is exactly the same treatment. That's it for the individual tracks of the drum. Now, everything goes to a drum bus where all the signals come together and get a little special treatment. Well, no EQ. There is nothing on it. Here, a little carving out even more low mids. What is this? Like 430 something. Just removing a little bit of mud, and here a little, yeah. Oh, I removed 425 and 439. It's just making space a little bit down there. A tiny bit of compression. I solo the whole kit. Here we go. Well, it's not doing anything. It was there just in case I need it. But we have compression going on, but I don't like too much compression on individual tracks. But I think the secret sauce to good drum sound is parallel compression, or the New York compression trick, as some used to call it. So basically, you route everything to a drum bus, and then you open up the same exact copy of the drum bus and put some serious compression on it and add this in parallel to the original sound. So you keep all the good transients of the original performance, but add this thick compression sound and make a really huge drum sound. Let me show you with and without. Oh, I show you the compressed sound solo first. Listen to that. So it's compressing heavily, like 12 dB of gain reduction. Really fast attack to get rid of all attack, and a pretty quick release. Here it's around 50 mil, so that every hit is getting the full compression. Now let me add back in the dry signal. Without parallel, it's boring. But if you add it in, bam! That's the secret to really great drum sound. You get all the good transient information, and you get all the good room and the character of the drums with this parallel compression. I love it. I couldn't do without. By the way, the only bus that I use except FX returns is drum bus. I don't make a guitar bus or vocal bus or anything. No groups. I don't know why. I just go straight to the master. I have no need for subgroups other than for drums. And if it wasn't for parallel compression, I would route everything to the master bus directly. That's basically everything we did on the drums. So it's not a huge lot. A little bit of carving out low mids, getting rid of harshness, taking care of phase and time alignment, a little bit of flavor with compression. And that's it. If you captured it well, it works. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more, then subscribe to the channel. And if you need help with your production, check out the link to Tidalwave Studio in the description below. See you!